everybody. My name is Mark Baskin. I teach international relations and public policy here, and I direct our program in peace and conflict studies. And I want to welcome everybody for coming to this event. It's another one of our public affairs roundtables that we hold periodically here at RIT Kosovo. And this one we're presenting together with Columbia University Institute for the Study of Human Rights. And it's an honor to be cooperating with them in such an event. I want to thank our President, Sharon Hart, and our Dean, Kamal Sharabi, who have shown great support for all of these activities as we move forward. And I think that support for these activities and in general for peace and conflict studies. And it's great that they're here with us today. And I want to thank our panelists, who are both great friends to RIT Kosovo, and who have found a way to navigate an interesting space somewhere between the government of Kosovo and civil society, and to be able to kind of speak truth to power in a way that actually has influence, which isn't always the case with civil society. But I think that both of the three panelists who are here, well, we'll talk in a minute who they are. David Phillips is the director of the Columbia University Institute for the Study of Human Rights. He's going to make the keynote opening remarks. David's an old friend to Kosovo. He's a regular visitor here. He's written extensively about this, and he's advised senior U.S. officials and many others. And then we have Luzim Petsi, who is the director of KIPRA, the Kosovo Institute for Policy Research and Development, which is one of the oldest and most really superb kind of policy think tanks in Kosovo. They've been operating for many years. And we have Florian Shahaya, who is the director of the Kosovo Center for Security Studies, and they are doing really remarkably good work on questions of security and countering violent extremism and things like that. My colleague, Robert Moharemi, has promised that he will try to join us at noon. He has a number of other obligations that he could not escape from at the last minute, and so hopefully he will join us. And we also advertised that Yeter Zuberai was going to, from the Foreign Ministry, was going to be with us, but Yeter wrote me yesterday that he was called away suddenly to some meetings outside the country, and so that he will not be able to join us. So we wish him well with his meetings, and hopefully we can get his perspective later. So before I give the floor to David, let me just say why we are here today. That the conflict between Kosovo and Serbia is actually frozen. The stakes are actually quite high. We're talking about membership in the EU ultimately. We're talking about sovereignty, complete membership in the UN. And then it seems that there's an inverse relationship between the amount of noise in all forms of media and any kind of real progress in the dialogue. And you know that the more you hear about it, the more you begin to think that there's really no progress at all. And the goal, of course, is a sustainable peace between these two neighbors, and that is no easy task to achieve. So the process of the dialogue, as I said, was frozen. Past agreements go unimplemented. Scheduled meetings don't take place. There's a lot of mutual blaming. A lot of politicians playing to their core constituencies. Presidents who are floating trial balloons. This then sets off this other cycle, so that this is this sort of ritualistic drama that's taking place. Both sides are jockeying for positions, and it's as if they're training for the final match in the championship, as if it's like World Cup kind of thing. And in the discussion, I don't want to prejudge any of the comments, but there's a lot of talk about the map, whether you talk about partition or border correction. But the reality is that the agreement will be quite complicated. It will involve many, many things. And just to say the Dayton Agreement, for example, the Framework Agreement for Peace that was cut at Dayton in 1995, has 11 articles, 11 long annexes, and it's 58 pages. And so that when we're talking about it, it's not simply a really simple thing. So it'll involve commitments to implementation of the agreement, accountability of the parties to make an agreement. It'll involve the EU and other great powers, not just one great power, but other great powers as well, in order for an agreement to be sustainable. And it will involve ensuring that there's capacity on all sides not just the parties on the ground, but the great powers as well, to make sure that the agreement that would come out would be implemented. So with these kind of questions and points in mind, I'll turn it over to David Phillips to explore what some of the issues are, and then Ulzing and Florian will respond to these remarks. Robert will join us, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So thanks very much.
So if this is a World Cup match, I want it to be known what side I'm on. President Sharon Hart is here. I'd like to acknowledge her presence. Great admiration for the work that she's doing here at the university. Mark, you've done champion's work organizing the program today. So I'm grateful to you. I also want to acknowledge some other friends and colleagues who are here. Venera Kusari from Columbia University has joined us. Welcome, Venera. My dear friend Arvin Cheku, with whom I've worked closely on Albanian issues in Macedonia, is here. He drove from Toronto this morning. This is a critical day today for Macedonia. And John Diody, who's a leader of the Albanian American community and lives in New Jersey, has also come a long way. So welcome to all. I'm very privileged and honored to be with you this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about the final stage of the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, which is nearing an end game. So far, negotiations have really been about less consequential matters: license plates, diplomas, area codes. But these topics really don't go far enough. I think the people of Kosovo and Serbia want more from their negotiators. They want the negotiations to be done transparently. They shouldn't be conducted behind closed doors. The views of civil society should be heard, and they rarely are in new democracies, so there needs to be more civic engagement. And most of all, there needs to be an end point. These negotiations can't go on indefinitely. And in my view, and in Columbia's report on the dialogue, we believe that the negotiations should conclude by the end of Federica Mogherini's mandate, which is in May of 2019. So all this being said, there are three basic scenarios about how negotiations can go forward. We can talk about border adjustment and partition. We can look at devolution and power sharing within the context of the Kosovo Constitution and the negotiation on ASM. There's also the possibility that the status quo would prevail. So those are really the three possible directions going forward. I'm going to try to analyze all three of those and then share with you a little bit about what I know and what I've learned from my discussions here. It's going to bring us up to the present. The discussion about partition isn't new. It originated in the 1990s with Dobrica Ćosić at the Serbian Academy of Social Sciences. Vuk Drašković championed the idea. More recently, Deputy Prime Minister Ivica Dačić has been a proponent of partition. He and Prime Minister Ana Brnabić went to Washington in August. They met with Jared Kushner, the son-in-law and presidential advisor, and they came out of the meeting saying all options are on the table. We don't know what those options are, although we'll discuss them today. And we need to be clear about the details, because in any agreement, as Mark pointed out, there are volumes of data and specific guidelines that have to be described and then adhered to. There needs to be a system for monitoring the agreement and enforcing the agreement. Because agreements are famous for being committed, but not fulfilled. So when Serbia says they want to do border adjustment, or when President Hashim Thaçi talks about border adjustment, we should be clear about what is being proposed. Dačić has essentially offered Serbia's recognition of Kosovo as an independent and sovereign state in exchange for Serbia's control of lands north of the Ibar River. Serbian enclaves in other parts of Kosovo would have autonomy and exercise executive powers. The Serbian Orthodox monastery in Dechani and other Orthodox monasteries in Kosovo would gain special protected status. Through the negotiations in Brussels, they already have been awarded such status, but Dacic is talking about sweetening their self-governance. Serbia has also talked about money, not surprisingly. When don't Serbs talk about money? And they want financial compensation for properties that they claim in Kosovo, including industrial and energy facilities that have been built over decades. Serbia proposes to resettle Serbian refugees currently residing in Serbia proper in parts of Kosovo that they would acquire under this partition plan. And we shouldn't underestimate the complexity of border adjustment or partition. It raises a series of very complicated technical and legal questions. How would demarcation occur? Exchanging lands north of the Ibar River for ethnically Albanian lands in Serbia has been put forward as an idea. Is that something that the government of Kosovo wants? And if so, would we do that proportionally, based on population, on land mass? A lot of complicated questions arise. What would happen to the ethnic Albanian community currently residing north of the Ibar? Would they stay where they are? Would they want to stay there? Would they come south? And what about Serbs who are living in other parts of Kosovo? We've seen Father Sava make very strong statements against partition because he's worried that the multi-ethnic and multi-sectarian character of Kosovo would be compromised and ultimately destroyed. What mechanisms would be established to manage population flows? When India and Pakistan separated, there was no organized, systematic process for moving populations back and forth, and there was an enormous amount of violence involved. Seizing assets, burning homes. Would this occur in a border adjustment for Kosovo? And then how would ASM factor into this? Would it just be ignored? Would the Serbs who remain in Kosovo continue to live there? And how would their rights be protected? Do they need special protections? Or are the existing mechanisms to protect and promote minority rights in this country adequate? The question of compensation is going to get raised. I did work in Kirkuk in northern Iraq after the Iraq War, and a property claims and compensation commission would be established here as well to review titles, to determine ownership, estimate the value of properties, and arrange a system for compensation. In Iraq, this was an extremely complicated process because you had multiple ethnic and religious groups laying claim to properties over different periods of time. I imagine that property claims here would also be extremely complicated. And then what about ownership of some important assets? Who would own the Trepsa mines? Would there be some trust fund established for ensuring that both communities benefited? Would Kosovo retain Trepsa, or would it be given to Serbia? It's now divided between both communities. How would there be continuity under the current arrangement moving forward? And then who would be responsible for developing Trepsa in the future? Is the mine largely exhausted? Are there huge gold reserves there, like some say? I have several beautiful stones in my home that Dr. Ibrahim Rogova gave me over the years. And he took enormous pride and love for Trepsa. So I know that it holds a very special place in the hearts and spirits of Kosovo. And what about other important natural resources? They would need to be addressed. Gazivoda Lake would need to be a part of the agreement. Would the water resources there be shared? Would electricity that's generated from the lake be put into a utility system? Would the utility be used in Kosovo proper? Would electricity be transported north to Serbia? All very complicated issues. So is the question of how you deal with the wounds of war. Having been in Kosovo regularly over the past 30 years, I know that the trauma that you all and your families experienced has left a deep wound. And there are still thousands of people that are unaccounted for. So what are we going to do? Just forget about them? Are we just going to turn the page? Or will there be a system for identifying them and trying to make some kind of recompense for their loss and suffering? And what would Serbia do as part of a deal? We assume that they would recognize Kosovo. That would be a cornerstone of the agreement. But would Serbia amend its constitution to recognize Kosovo? And what about the non-recognizers in the European Union? Spain, Greece, Cyprus, Romania, and Slovakia. Just because Kosovo and Serbia make a deal doesn't necessarily mean that all 5 of those countries would go along and recognize Kosovo. I think Spain is particularly problematic given the separatist movements that exist within Spain, places like Catalonia. A takeaway from this whole discussion is that partition would have not only practical ramifications, but also huge symbolic repercussions. The idea of Kosovo as a multi-ethnic democratic state where different groups live together would be lost. And I know from the work that I did with Ambassador Richard Holbrooke over the years, that principle of multiculturalism and power sharing through democracy and rights protection was at the core of US policy in the 1990s, and it should be a core principle for US policy going forward. Also, I don't want to see Serbia achieve at the negotiating table what Slobodan Milosevic failed to achieve in the battlefield with ethnic cleansing. It would be an injustice to the memories of those who suffered if we gave to Serbia what they want without recalling and having memory of those who have sacrificed. So the second scenario involves devolution, which is an alternative to partition. This would be an enhanced power sharing arrangement. The Kosovo government would commit itself to the protection and promotion of minority rights in accordance with its own constitution, reflecting the Adisari principles that are enshrined in agreements and then reiterated in the constitution itself. The government of Kosovo would need to rededicate itself to reforms. And we all know that the corrosive effect of corruption and bad governance in Kosovo has created a period of time that's been wasted for the country. Instead of moving forward and developing economically and socially, many of the opportunities for self-improvement have been lost. And what about the Association of Serbian Municipalities? Would it still be implemented? Would it have application to Serbian communities outside of the north, down in the southern parts of Kosovo? These are all issues that we would need to consider carefully. My own view is that partition is a formula for failure. It would be destabilizing and dangerous. The devolution and power sharing is much more preferable. But we need to be very clear about the details. Of course, we don't want ASM to be awarded with executive powers. I think everybody knows that's been a big topic for discussion. But we should be clear about how we would divvy up authority. And in my view, the government of Kosovo should enumerate what powers it would retain, powers over the judiciary, over the police, control of urban planning, and also environmental issues. I benefited from guidance from my friend and colleague Florian on this subject. I believe strongly those powers should be retained. There should also be special measures adopted in accordance with the Agreement on Special Protected Zones to make sure that Dechani and other iconic monasteries in Serbia are preserved. So the third alternative is just status quo. There's nothing that requires an agreement. I don't think that the status quo is viable. We've wasted so much time already. We have to move forward in some way, shape, or form. If there isn't progress, I believe that the people of Kosovo will grow increasingly frustrated, that the impasse that exists within the government will also be an impasse existing in the society. It could lead to violence, instability. So a deal is better than no deal. And a deal in a reasonable amount of time is a prerequisite for making real progress that helps the country move forward and helps society to advance. So, what do we know about the dialogue in Brussels? Frankly, not a lot. At the end of the dialogue sessions, Madame Mogherini appears in her smart Italian suits with President Thacci and President Vucic. They have a photo up, everyone smiles and looks good. But there's never any real disclosure of what they talked about. So what have you been doing during all these meetings? What's been discussed? In my view, they've been discussing the broad parameters of a deal that would involve the partition of Kosovo. And even though the details of that, the land, territories, and others haven't been articulated, Hashim Thacci has already, in his own mind, committed to surrender territory for his legacy, for his reputation as a leader, and to deal with extraterritorial juridical issues that might be threatening to him. So what territories would that deal include? I don't think that's been put on paper. I don't think that's really known. I think that the government of Kosovo, President Thacci in particular, wants to retain Trepsa, retain Mitrovica, to retain the Gozibaze Lake. What incentive would Serbia have to a deal that allows Kosovo to retain all those territories? We haven't seen a lot of flexibility or accommodation from Serbs in the past. So why suddenly would they agree to those terms? Of course, Chapter 35 restricts Serbia's membership in the EU. That's a big condition. And ostensibly, if there was an agreement between Serbia and Kosovo, Chapter 35 would be lifted, normalization would occur. But I think it's wishful thinking to expect Belgrade and Vucic in particular, who, let's recall, takes his pedigree from Slobodan Milosevic, to suddenly surrender core positions. The U.S. is an important factor here. And the Quint, the countries that were established under the Vienna mediation, the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and the U.S. So we don't really know what the U.S. position is. I'm a fairly close observer. I read Ambassador Bolton's statement over and over again, and there's no clue there whether the U.S. supports partition or not. What he says is that the U.S. will support what the parties agree to. We'll study it and then let you know what our position is. So there's no commitment there to support a partition plan. And it would be a fool's errand to interpret Bolton's comments as an endorsement of adjusting borders. The details have to be worked out and then it needs to be evaluated. And how would the other Quint countries respond? Germany is very strongly on record opposing partition. The UK has a similar position. France, as always, has had a pro-Serbian bias, support President Vucic's position here. So will the Quint achieve unanimity? There needs to be some kind of an effort made by the U.S. to bring those parties together so that we're all on the same page. And what about the politicians in Kosovo? I was shocked over the past 48 hours to read the statements that were coming from the President and the Prime Minister about one another. I mean, we know there's always been tensions, but those tensions never really rose to the surface. The fact they now have risen to the surface is very worrisome. The government of Kosovo should be projecting a position of unity. President Thacci should care dearly about what the government believes and what the opposition believes, and instead of running this negotiation on his own, opposition parties and figures should be involved. I spoke with Alvin Kurti from Vetendosje earlier this morning, and he strongly believes that opposition parties should have a role, and so do I. So this is complicated. It's not going to be solved easily, and it's certainly not going to be solved unless the U.S. is driving the train and making it happen. So we can't do this through the bureaucracy. We can't allow competing agencies in Washington to express their views. I would endorse the designation of a special U.S. envoy for the Western Balkans to assist the discussions between Belgrade and Pristina, to help facilitate the votes in the parliament and the referendum in Macedonia over the name agreement with Greece, to monitor and enforce good governance and anti-corruption in Albania. The U.S. needs to step up to the plate. And if the U.S. steps up to the plate, then I have confidence that ethnic Albanian leaders in the Western Balkans will as well. Because I've always believed that the U.S. and Albanians have a special relationship, and the United States has no better friend than Albanians in Kosovo, in Albania, in Tetovo, and Gostivar. So working together, I think these problems can be solved. But they won't be solved by one person, and they won't be solved in a smoke-filled room without transparency. I know that my colleagues are going to have a lot to add to this discussion. I appreciate the opportunity to frame some of the issues and share those thoughts with you. So thank you all very much.
So, Louis, you can sit and talk into the mic, or you can stand up and talk into the mic. This is Unfreezing Patsy, who is the director of the Kosovo Institute for Policy, Research and Development.
Dear friends, dear guests, I'm so happy to be with you here today. I'm going to try to be a bit complimentary to David's remarks. And I'm going to start with, and I'm going to target only the idea of partition, which has been pursued by Thaci, and what it has brought to Kosovo, what it means for Kosovo nowadays. What are the implications of this adventure? First of all, as David has mentioned, the idea of partition of Kosovo originates within the political and academic establishment of Serbia since the 80s of the last century. Interestingly, this idea has been pursued until September 2011, when Chancellor Merkel paid a visit in autumn of 2011 to Serbia and met Serbia's President Tadic. Then this idea got silent because the message from Germany was very straightforward. Forget about partition. There is, and that this option shall not be on the table. However, last year, this idea started to be supported by President Thaci, who has worked intensively on this idea with his Serbian counterpart, President Vučić. I can say that the major picture of partition is already agreed between Thaci and Vučić. But I must say that this agreement is between two people. It's not gonna. It will be very difficult to become an agreement between two countries. And why, in my opinion, why they are pursuing this idea? I think that, and why this idea got rebirthed actually. I think that this is based on very superficial calculations of Vučić and Thaci that the world politics is facing turbulences and uncertainties, that the West is facing decline and disarray, and Russia's power is growing. This is actually a kind of explanation that I got from some people who are close to Thaci's cycles. But, okay, let's take a look where is nowadays Russia. The GDP of Russia is more or less equal with the GDP of Italy. Military spending of Russia are smaller than military spending of Great Britain. Is Russia that strong nowadays? I don't think so. And it has no prospects to become a superpower again. Russia nowadays is just a regional power which has a seat in the United Nations Security Council. It can project problems all around the world, but it cannot solve a single problem. And I think that because of this estimation of the circumstances in the world, both Thaci and Vučić thought that this is the right momentum to pursue their ideas about partition based on ethnic composition, which has nothing in common with liberal democracy and European values. Okay, I'm able to understand Thaci and Vučić because both of them are, how to say, turbo folk autocrats. But I cannot understand Madame Mogherini, why she's supporting this idea which has nothing to deal with European values. I've been participating in the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia in Brussels. I can tell you one thing according to my best knowledge. We had negotiations with the Serbian side, facilitated by you, but those negotiations that we had were not even transmitted to Coreper. So EU had, in general, had no idea what is going on with the negotiations in Brussels. They have seen only the final results. And that's why nowadays, and EU is divided regarding Kosovo, because Germany is not supporting partition, France is supporting partition, and majority of countries in the EU are not supporting partition. Why this happened? Because EU was not even transparent towards EU member states. What are the consequences of Thaci's adventure? First of all, the results of Pristina-Belgrade dialogue in the last 8 years practically have been nullified. So what has been achieved in the north regarding the rule of law, regarding the justice system, police, then local elections, practically those results have been nullified. Then another consequence that is that we are facing the highest level of uncertainty since the end of 90s. And I'm here talking about both communities, Albanians and Serbs, because they don't know what is going to be their future, either in Kosovo or for Albanians in Preševo Valley. What it has brought, a deep division among political parties and Prime Minister and President. It has brought division among most important supporters of Kosovo. And from our experience of the past, we know that Serbia always has a strong position in negotiations when the West is divided. So right now we have to make an extra effort to unify our friends for our cause. And this is not going to be an easy task. Let me mention a few facts. So, for example, we had not a single international recognition of our country in this year. This is not an accident. And I have a question. I thought that Gettler would come today to this meeting, and I was going to ask him a very specific question. To whom are serving our diplomatic missions? And which options they are lobbying in the capitals where they do represent our country? Do they lobby the option of president, prime minister, or foreign minister? From this question, we can assume that our diplomacy nowadays must be in disarray, and it will not be taken seriously. Who will be taken actually seriously from all our diplomatic representatives? Only political appointees, let's say fascist representatives, and the rest will not be taken into account at all by host countries. Right now, we have to control the damage which has been caused by fascist adventure. Okay, let's look at it. We don't have a unity team for negotiations with Serbia, and I think that this was the biggest mistake of opposition parties, because they have let, actually, by not creating a unity team, they have let Thaci to be a sole player in negotiations with Belgrade. Secondly, do we need a unity team with divergent positions? I think that this would be a suicidal option for Kosovo. I think that we need a unity team with a unified position and negotiation strategy. But there is a question mark here. Can dialogue be led by Thaci, who is opposed by the vast majority of Kosovo's political parties? This is the question which has to be answered in the parliament. I think that right now we need a strategic patience. We shall not hurry with the dialogue. We shall wait until European elections are completed by May next year, and we shall wait for the new chief of foreign and security policy of EU. And then we can have new elections and we can resume the dialogue with Belgrade. Why I'm saying so? Because Madame Mogherini is a strong supporter of a partition of Kosovo. I have illustrated to you how much personally driven is the foreign policy of European Union. That's why we have to wait and see, and we shall look who might be the new boss of EU, and then we can decide how to move forward. Thank you very much.
Florian, you can sit and talk, or you can go on.
Do the same. So, okay. So, being the last speaker, I will try to be brief, and of course, I will not replicate what David and Julie said about the core issues related to the land swapping, especially land swapping and partition, or whatever we call. Simply because I personally don't believe that this is going to happen. And I don't want to believe that this will happen. And like you can just imagine, like we have very technical agreements that have been reached, and these were not implemented, like diploma recognition. Like if we don't have these kind of technical agreements being implemented and objected strongly, especially by Serbia, then like would you expect that such an agreement would be implemented if that would happen? So I really repeat that I don't want to add more onto the issue of the partition, although I think that this is an option now, and it's an official option, as David said, and we shall not, like downplay it, and we shall not simply ignore it, because we are hearing this, and in the context with different diplomats and like international actors, this is now in the table, comparing to a few months ago that was out of the table. I would like to relate more to the topic to the very topic of our discussion in the frozen conflict. I think the reason why we came up with this bad idea about swapping or partitioning is because the other options are not good as well. I think that from the discussion that was emerging in the dialogue and so on, the previous ideas about the legally binding agreement that EU was using this kind of constructive ambiguity, which we paid more and much more than Serbia. And actually Serbia had more clarity, and this ambiguity that EU was playing was like some more at our expense. They refer to legally binding agreement, and according to a number of countries, key member states of the EU, legally binding agreement was an agreement about bringing all the existing agreements that have been reached into a framework, maybe adding some other technical elements, and that's it. So leaving aside the elephant in the room, I think that Kosovo has the only option of making Serbia agreeing on Kosovo and recognizing it through the EU instrument. Otherwise, if we wouldn't have the EU instrument, Serbia would not opt for any agreement with Kosovo. And that's why, I'm not in line with some diplomats here in Pristina saying that Sava Janic is more constructive, because you mentioned Sava Janic, and then I recall. Because, for instance, what Sava Janic is saying is that he is exactly opting for a frozen conflict, but in a sophisticated way. For instance, the message that the Orthodox Church is sending to the international diplomats is that, look, we have been waiting, according to them, 500 years under the Ottoman Empire. We have subscribed to the rules of the Ottoman Empire, and then after 500 years, the Serbian army returned. So this is the same logic that they are using, like we can wait for 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, hence we shall not subscribe to any kind of agreement or recognizing Kosovo, because the things, the constellation may change. And, Serbia would eventually return to Kosovo. It doesn't have to be militarily, but through other means. So that's why I'm saying that we should not be in the comfort zone, in the sense that saying that, we should subscribe to the fact that we need to stick to the status quo. It's better to stick to the status quo than to have a bad deal. But I don't think that we have this kind of commodity to say that we can indefinitely stick into status quo, for the reason that we sense that there is international fatigue with Kosovo, even before the latest move. Like now, when you ask the international actors to support Kosovo's membership in some international organization, they are simply tired of giving constant support in a constant battle that is going on not only between Kosovo and Serbia, but between Russia and the West. So it should not be seen only in the context of the Kosovo-Serbia, but Russia and the West. So you can sense, and we do sense at least, or I speak for myself, that the international community is not as much supportive as it was, and is not expected to be supported under the existing circumstances. So the price that we are going to pay is much higher than Serbia when it comes to status quo. That's at least my interpretation. For instance, we have a new elite coming among the international presence, like new diplomats and so on, like young ministers of foreign affairs. They are buying the existing argument of Serbia that the Serbs were the victims, and not vice versa. They are buying it, we want it or not. Only the researchers that go in depth back into the conflict, they will understand what happened. Like the ordinary people, they are being served with a narrative that we were the aggressors, and not vice versa. So, the constellation is changing. And I'm not saying that we should be ultimately worried, but I'm just saying that the time is not necessarily working for us. You know, like. And I repeat, it's better to stay like this than to subscribe to a bad agreement. And of course, swapping, I don't want to believe that that's an agreement. But there were other agreements that were being offered that did not imply, you know, like normalization in a broader sense. You know why? Because there are lots of countries in the part of the EU, like even the major countries, that they are ultimately interested that Serbia enters the EU, and they are not interested that Kosovo state building project is finished, because they can handle this. You know, like in a way, they will just handle it from the security and stability perspective. They don't care from the perspective of long-term state building and development. We have, at least I have observed, that the other options that have been offered have been more in the direction of the technical agreement. So Kosovo would sign, no recognition would be offered, no UN seat would be offered. You would sign ultimately Serbia's admission in EU, and then Serbia could play with you. And I know that even if Serbia is going to recognize us, they are going to make problems, and they will going to make challenges to Kosovo. But it's still different. It's still different, and hence I think that the final agreement with Kosovo, between Kosovo and Serbia, should imply recognition, not by all cost, I repeat, but it should be the ultimate goal, and we should not refrain from that, because with the recognition, we will make sure that the countries that did not recognize Kosovo, they will gonna do that. At least this is the message that they're sending. So they're saying that the recognition would imply recognition from their side, but not necessarily other type of agreements. And if still Russia and China would object Kosovo's membership in UN, the other alternatives would be NATO. And I don't see, you know, like as a coincidence, the fact that KSF is moving now in terms of getting a new mandate, because an alternative, and if we are going to have an agreement that would lead to recognition, NATO could be an alternative as long as we would have problems with the UN, in the sense that US would hopefully provide a quick pathway for Kosovo's admission to NATO, and we could have some sort of security guarantees, you know, like that we would not be, you know, like subject to, you know, like, let's say, diplomatic harassment and some sort of, you know, like pressure from Serbia. We have been observing that Serbia is becoming much more aggressive, and they are playing in two cards. One card is swapping, partition, sorry. So they are opting for partition, not for swapping. And the second is that they are working in parallel in terms of derecognition. Derecognition of Kosovo is happening, we want it or not. You have the case of Suriname, you have the case of New Papua Guinea. This happened, the nota verbal has been transmitted, you know, and it is not that, you know, like Kosovo had some sort of interaction with these countries, but they are in a diplomatic offensive, you know, like, and they are positioning Kosovo in a much more difficult position that we used to be a few years ago. And I can tell you, this is also combined with the fact that internally we are having much more challenges now. We no longer have the momentum of enthusiasm in terms of state building compared to 10 years ago. You don't see this in the public administration, you don't see this in diplomacy, and you see that increasingly number of young people are more opting to go out of the country than to serve this country and to help the state building process. So to conclude, I think that we should be really united, and there should be unity team, as Julia said, you know, like, and to include all the actors, including the opposition in the process. I don't think that we should stick into the fact that some names or some individuals are dealing with this. I think this is a process that serves all of us, strategically serves us, and we should not allow concessions that are detrimental to our faith and are detrimental to our functionality in Kosovo, especially, you know, like in the south of Europe. And of course, we should opt, you know, like, as the ultimate goal for recognition. I don't think other options other than recognition are an option, at least to me. So I finish here. I look forward to any questions that come from your side.
So thank you to all the speakers. I think we have some time that we can ask questions. I have a microphone, if anyone wants to ask a question.
Is working?
Theoretically. It's always theory and practice. It's always.
Hi, I'm
Speak
Regina.
into the microphone.
I'm a senior in RIT Kosovo, and I wanted to ask, since these three options are not referable because the partition means that Serbia will be a threat to other countries, to other neighboring countries such as Bosnia, and power sharing will mean that Serbia will be dividing and then ruling Kosovo in a way, and status quo is not viable. What other options are out there?
Should we collect a couple of questions, or should we? Any other questions? We have these four, and then we'll do it. Speak right into the mic.
Hi, I'm Agnesa, and I'm a junior student here at RIT Kosovo. I have two questions directed at David and Florian. The first question directed to David is that you mentioned like a proposal of like introducing a U.S. special envoy who is going to deal with Western Balkans, which is like a very good idea. But I'm interested as to the correlation in regards to like the America First policy that Trump has been like promoting recently, and how is that? How can we be assured that the U.S. special envoy for Western Balkans is not going to actually further promote those policies on Western Balkans and just just add more to like the risk of destabilization in Balkans? And the second question is directed to Florian. Is you mentioned like that recognition should be the ultimate goal, which is I fully agree on that. But we know the risks of the status quo. But knowing that there is a very low probability that the agreement is going to be on simple technical issues, and knowing that the idea of partitioning or swapping of territories is being presented, what do you personally think that should the Kosovo and Serbia agree on such terms of partitioning or not? Because I feel like the probability of it being on like very technical terms is very low. So what do you think fundamentally? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate. I want to thank you guys for coming. I've been very passionate about this topic since I started hearing it. Of course, since reading about it and learning about it, I've been very suspicious about the involvement of Russia, how big of a role it plays. And I'm referring to the paramilitary forces that Russia is building with Serbian minorities in Bosnia now that we know of, but anywhere else in the Balkans where there are Serbian minorities. And so Vučić suddenly wanting to make an agreement for peace before being hostile, how do I say, would Russia be, influencing or pressuring Vučić towards an agreement for other political motives?
Hi, my name is Jakob, and I also want to thank you guys for coming here. My question is for Mr. Phillips specifically about his mention of Serbia, and Spain and their relationship. You mentioned that Spain would be another very hard to, even if Serbia were to recognize Kosovo, Spain would also, it'd be very difficult for them to recognize Kosovo because of their ideology toward separatism in certain Catalonia. Through my work as a journalist here in Kosovo, I noticed that during the Catalonia independence movement, I spoke to journalists in Kosovo and in Spain, and they both said that it is ridiculous to even compare the notion of Catalonia in Spain compared to Kosovo and Serbia. So I just want to ask that, do you think that it is true in essence that they will ultimately refuse to recognize Kosovo in spite of the fact that Serbia would recognize Kosovo as well?
One final short question here.
Thank you very much. I've got a general question, I'm very quick. If Thacci actually signs that agreement, let's say in the future, and I believe strongly that he will do that. And I know that for an agreement to be like really legally binding, the parliament has to ratify it. And if the parliament doesn't ratify it, and if we one day just go to that point where we actually can break that agreement with Serbia, what are going to be the consequences of Kosovo?
You wanna?
So the first question had to do with other options. If by May 2019, there is no agreement between Kosovo and Serbia, then the Albanian nation needs to reflect on its path forward. And we should have a serious discussion about when, how, and by whom there would be unification of Albanian territories, including Albanian territories in Macedonia in the wake of this referendum and the failed negotiations between Greece and Macedonia over the name issue, should they in fact collapse. Second question has to do with America First. In my view, America First is the same as Kosovo First. Our interests are linked. If the U.S. is going to be acting solely on its own national interest, it will be further isolated in the international community and will find itself with fewer and fewer friends. The U.S. has no better friend than Albanians, and we need to understand that and start acting on it, have policies that reflect that truth. I would add that the other good friend of the United States has been the Kurds, and we've shown a willingness there to recruit them to fight ISIS, and then once many have died, to throw them under the bus and abandon them. And that's not the way the U.S. is going to expand its prestige and power and influence in the world. There was a question of Russia policy. In my view, Moscow cares less about Serbia, cares nothing about Serbia. This idea of Slavic solidarity, or solidarity between the Orthodox churches, is a complete fabrication. Russia is motivated in Kosovo by one goal only, which is to undermine the influence of the United States, to work towards destroying NATO and the EU, and if that involves trampling over Kosovo or destroying the national aspirations of Albanians, then so be it. Moscow is prepared to do that because it's driven by its superpower competition with the United States. And let me just say, when it comes to economy, security, and culture, there is no competition. Being an American, I strongly believe that the U.S. sets the standard. Unfortunately, as of late, especially the past weeks with the debate over Justice Kavanaugh, and the past 2 years with our administration, we haven't set the standard that I would hope for. Politics is always about cycles. So we will soon return to a leadership role for which I am proud. Equating Catalonia and Kosovo is a false comparison. It's done purely for expedient reasons. The same way Russia invaded Crimea and cited the Kosovo precedent, Catalonia is cited by Spanish leaders to justify their nationalist policies. So we're in a moment where either there's going to be further integration, or following Brexit and other nationalist models is going to be fragmentation. And our prosperity and peace and security is enhanced with integration. Our rights and our freedoms and our democracies are degraded through fragmentation.
Let's go back to Spain and to the origins of the problems with Spain. In 2004, Socialist Party in Spain won elections. And the first decision that they took at the time was to order withdrawal of Spanish troops from Iraq. We shall not forget that Spain and Prime Minister Aznar has supported George Bush in his endeavor in Iraq. And when Kosovo's independence was getting closer, at that point of time, the relations between US and Spain was at the lowest level. There was no practically communication between Zapatero and President George Bush. I still recall the momentum in Madrid when the military parade was taking place and when American flag has been shown, the Prime Minister Zapatero didn't salute it at all. So this is the one dimension of, let's say, Spanish problem towards Kosovo. The other problem is that they have internalized the issue of Kosovo without any rational reason. They started to make, especially the socialist government, but a popular party joined them immediately. And in creating this hysteria that if they would recognize Kosovo, Catalonia, and Basque Country will get out of Spain very fast. And they were not in favor of how they were calling it, unilateral declaration of independence. If you read carefully the Spanish testimony at the International Court of Justice, there you can find their way of legal thinking. It is very traditional, it is very outdated. And they have been very much convinced that they will win the case together with Serbia. At that time, the foreign minister, the then foreign minister, Miguel Moratinos, promised to our authorities, they had a secret meeting in Paris, hosted by Bernard Kouchner. And he promised to Kosovar authorities that if the decision of the International Court of Justice is going to be positive for Kosovo, Spain would recognize it. They didn't. Then it was the declaration of Prime Minister Zapatero at the General Assembly of United Nations in 2010. And he said that if Kosovo achieves 100 recognitions, 101st recognition will come from Spain. It didn't happen. Why all of this is happening? Because in essence, Spain has still difficulties in dealing with its past. It is not still believing and trusting to its democratic system. The new Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, he's taking some major steps in this direction. A few weeks ago, he passed a law in the Parliament of Spain by which the bones of the dictator Franco will be moved from its mausoleum. It's a fantastic big, how to say,